Welcome back to our channel, where we dive deep into the heart-stopping drama of Genoa City. Today is a beautiful day to unravel the complex web of power, addiction, and family loyalty that binds our favorite characters. Let us step right into the shadows of the Newman Empire, where a father's desperate love is about to cross every conceivable boundary. The landscape of Genoa City has forever been defined by the towering, inescapable shadow of Victor Newman, a patriarch whose brand of love has frequently blurred the line between fierce protection and absolute tyranny. For decades, the residents of this city have witnessed Victor manipulate, control, and dominate his children under the unwavering belief that he alone knows what is best for their survival. However, the current crisis surrounding his son, Nick Newman, has pushed the Newman patriarch into uncharted, profoundly dark psychological territory. The revelation that Nick has not only suffered a catastrophic relapse into fentanyl addiction, but has also actively orchestrated a premeditated murder plot against Matt Clark has shattered the fragile illusions of stability within the family. Victor is no longer dealing with a rebellious son seeking independence. He is dealing with a desperate, chemically altered fugitive who is rapidly accelerating toward his own demise. The sheer gravity of this realization forces Victor to abandon any remaining pretense of conventional parental support, driving him to execute one of the most extreme, legally perilous, and emotionally devastating maneuvers of his entire life. The catalyst for this unprecedented escalation stems directly from the undeniable, horrifying evidence that Victor has meticulously compiled. Through his vast network of surveillance and the agonizing confession extracted from Adam Newman, Victor is forced to confront the grotesque reality of Nick's descent into darkness. The toxicology reports confirming the lethal presence of fentanyl in Nick's system, the subsequent felony possession charges levied by the Genoa City Police Department, and the chilling details of Nick's conspiracy to use private investigator James Burrow as a pawn in a lethal revenge scheme against Matt Clark paint a picture of a man who has completely lost his tether to morality and reason. The final, unbearable blow comes with the knowledge that Nick, fresh from a near-fatal coma, actively fled the safety of his hospital room, driven by a blinding, insatiable craving to purchase tainted narcotics from a street-level dealer. For Victor, this is the ultimate failure of the traditional medical and legal systems. He recognizes with absolute, chilling clarity that if Nick is left to his own devices, he will either die in a squalid alleyway from a lethal overdose, or spend the rest of his natural life rotting in a federal penitentiary for the murder of his greatest enemy. Faced with this apocalyptic scenario, Victor's psychological response is entirely characteristic of his authoritarian nature, yet magnified to a terrifying degree. He completely bypasses the authorities, the medical professionals, and even the input of his own wife, deciding that the only way to save his son's life is to completely strip him of his autonomy. Victor mobilizes his elite, highly trained private security force, issuing a set of cold, uncompromising directives that treat his own flesh and blood not as a beloved family member, but as a highly dangerous, hostile target that must be acquired and subdued at any cost. The atmosphere surrounding this operation is thick with a suffocating tension, a dark, militaristic precision that highlights the tragic absurdity of a father hunting down his son. The security operatives, men who have spent years protecting the Newman family from external threats, are now tasked with executing a clandestine kidnapping operation against the heir to the empire. Moving through the shadows of Genoa City with clinical, emotionless efficiency, Nick's state of mind in the moments leading up to this ambush is a harrowing portrait of sheer, unadulterated agony. The physical and psychological torment of fentanyl withdrawal has entirely consumed his consciousness, reducing the once proud, morally steadfast Newman heir to a trembling, paranoid shell driven solely by chemical desperation. Every nerve ending in his body screams for relief, while his mind is plagued by violent, obsessive fantasies of enacting bloody vengeance upon Matt Clark. The trauma of his recent captivity, the betrayal of his own body, and the overwhelming shame of his relapse have coalesced into a blinding storm of irrationality. He wanders the periphery of the city, hypervigilant and feral, completely unaware that the greatest threat to his immediate freedom is not the police or his enemies, but the very bloodline that courses through his veins. Nick believes he is the master of his own dark destiny, entirely ignorant of the invisible net that his father has systematically cast over him. The inevitable confrontation erupts with a sudden, shocking violence that shatters the quiet desperation of Nick's flight. As the Newman security team converges on his location, the reality of the ambush triggers a primal, explosive fight-or-flight response within Nick. Stripped of his dignity and fueled by the chaotic energy of withdrawal, Nick fights back with a terrifying, animalistic ferocity. The physical struggle is brutal and undignified, a visceral clash of bodies that sees the Newman air thrashing, striking, and clawing against the men hired to protect him. He screams in rage and panic, his mind incapable of processing the intervention as anything other than a hostile attack. The sheer desperation of his resistance requires the security team to use overwhelming physical force to subdue him, pinning him to the ground in a heartbreaking display of familial tragedy. It is a moment of profound humiliation and absolute powerlessness, as the chemical demon inside Nick is forcibly overpowered by the iron will of his father's mercenaries. Emerging from the shadows to witness the culmination of his ruthless directive, Victor Newman stands as a monolith of unyielding resolve. The silent, dialogue-free standoff between the subdued, panting son and the stoic, towering father is heavy with decades of complicated, often toxic history. Victor looks down at the broken, writhing form of his child, his expression devoid of pity, but anchored by a terrifying, absolute conviction. In Victor's mind, this brutal subjugation is the purest, most profound manifestation of paternal devotion. He views the kidnapping not as a crime, but as a necessary, holy intervention. This is his definition of tough-level love, so fierce, so uncompromising, that it is willing to commit atrocities to preserve the life of the beloved. Victor's silent posture communicates a chilling promise. He will absorb the hatred, the legal risks, and the moral condemnation of the world, so long as it guarantees that Nick continues to draw breath. The transportation of the captive Nick is a deeply unsettling sequence, steeped in the ethical ambiguity of Victor's extreme measures. Nick is forcibly restrained, his physical autonomy completely erased as he is hauled into the back of an armored Newman transport vehicle. The journey back to the sprawling Newman ranch is not a return to a place of comfort and familial warmth, but a descent into a highly secure, inescapable purgatory. As the heavy iron gates of the estate close behind them, the finality of the situation settles over the narrative like a lead weight. Victor has effectively created a black site within his own home, a place where the laws of Genoa City hold no jurisdiction, and where the only ruling authority is the absolute, dictatorial decree of the Newman patriarch. The ethical darkness of this choice is staggering, a testament to the terrifying lengths to which wealth and power can be weaponized in the name of familial preservation. The destination for this forced rehabilitation is a specially prepared, heavily fortified, and completely isolated wing of the Newman Ranch. This hidden facility has been stripped of anything that could be used as a weapon, transformed into a sterile, indestructible cage designed specifically to withstand the violent throes of a severe narcotic detox. The reinforced doors, the impenetrable windows, and the constant, suffocating presence of armed guards create an atmosphere of absolute, claustrophobic despair. When Nick is finally deposited into this gilded cell, the heavy locks engaging behind him sound like the slamming of a vault. He is entirely cut off from the outside world, from his enablers, from his enemies, and most importantly, from the lethal substance that has hijacked his brain. The Newman Ranch, traditionally a symbol of the family's immense success and legacy, has been perverted into a maximum security prison for its own prince. The onset of the forced withdrawal marks the beginning of an agonizing, microscopic battle for Nick's soul. Without the option of a medically supervised tapering process, Nick is thrown abruptly into the violent, excruciating abyss of sudden opiate cessation. The physical symptoms manifest with a terrifying intensity: the uncontrollable tremors, the bone-deep aches, the suffocating waves of nausea, and the blinding, feverish sweats. But the psychological torment is infinitely worse. Left alone with his thoughts in the sterile isolation of his cell, Nick is forced to confront the monstrous reality of his actions. The walls seem to close in on him as the numbing blanket of fentanyl is ripped away, exposing the raw, bleeding wounds of his trauma regarding Matt Clark, his failures as a father, and his deep-seated resentments toward Victor. It is a brutal, unvarnished reckoning, a descent into a personal hell where the only way out is through an ocean of unimaginable suffering. As this clandestine nightmare unfolds behind locked doors, the impending discovery of Victor's actions by Nikki Newman threatens to detonate a catastrophic emotional explosion within the family. Nikki, a woman whose own life has been deeply scarred by the relentless, humiliating battle against addiction, possesses a profound, empathetic understanding of the demons currently tearing Nick apart. When she inevitably uncovers the horrifying truth that her husband has unilaterally decided to kidnap their son and lock him in a cage like a feral beast, the psychological impact will be devastating. Nikki knows intimately that addiction cannot be cured through brute force and captivity, and Victor's draconian methods will be viewed not as an act of love, but as an act of supreme, unforgivable arrogance. The revelation of this forced isolation is destined to shatter the fragile truths of their marriage, pitting the desperate empathy of a mother against the iron-fisted tyranny of a father. The broader ripple effects of Victor's extreme intervention will inevitably fracture the entire Newman family structure. Victoria, already drowning in the corporate fallout of the PR scandal, will be torn between her pragmatic need to protect the company's image and her visceral horror at her father's extrajudicial imprisonment of her brother. Adam, who bears the heavy, agonizing guilt of being the informant who handed Nick over to Victor's wrath, will be forced to grapple with the realization that his attempt to save his brother has resulted in Nick's absolute subjugation. Sharon, whose maternal terror has been running at a fever pitch, will be paralyzed by the knowledge that the father of her children is enduring unspeakable agony in a secret dungeon, completely inaccessible to the outside world. Victor's authoritarianism, designed to save the family, is instead systematically dismantling the very foundation of trust and mutual respect that binds them together. Watching this storyline unfold, one cannot help but feel a profound, aching sorrow for the devastating reality of addiction. It is truly heartbreaking to witness a character as historically strong and morally grounded as Nick Newman be reduced to a trembling shell of his former self by something as insidious as fentanyl. There is a deep, unsettling tragedy in seeing a family tear itself apart under the guise of protection, and it stirs a genuine sense of dread within us as we observe the lengths to which a parent will go when paralyzed by the fear of losing a child. The emotional weight of this narrative is suffocating, leaving a lingering sadness about the destructive power of substance abuse and the agonizing helplessness felt by those who love the afflicted. It forces the audience to confront the uncomfortable reality that sometimes the most horrific actions are born from the most desperate, terrified places of the human heart. Yet, as Nick writhes in the agonizing darkness of his enforced rehabilitation, a far more sinister threat continues to operate unchecked beyond the fortified walls of the Newman estate. Matt Clark, the architect of this entire catastrophe, remains free, masquerading behind his feigned amnesia while secretly reveling in the total destruction of his enemies. With Nick incapacitated, and the Newman family internally fractured by Victor's ruthless intervention, the board is entirely open for Matt to execute the next phase of his malevolent design. What will this sadistic predator do when he realizes his primary target has been removed from the playing field? And what kind of man will Nick Newman become if he manages to survive the fire of his father's brutal crucible? The shadows over Genoa City have never been darker, and the true battle for survival has only just begun.